Spring arrived quietly in Red Willow Valley, Wyoming Territory, in April of 1888. The long winter had finally released its grip on the land, leaving behind rolling green meadows sprinkled with bright yellow balsam root and delicate purple lupins. Snow still clung to the distant mountain peaks, but down in the valley the air carried the warm scent of fresh grass, damp earth, and blooming wildflowers. It was the kind of morning that promised new beginnings to everyone, except Eleanor Brooks. She stood alone beside the weathered wooden chapel her grandfather had built decades earlier. The tiny church overlooked the valley, where endless fields stretched beneath a cloudless blue sky. The wind gently lifted the hem of the pale lavender dress she wore, its fabric shimmering softly in the morning sunlight. It wasn't an ordinary dress. It had never been meant for an ordinary day. Eleanor slowly brushed invisible dust from a sleeve, tracing the tiny hand-stitched flowers embroidered near the cuffs. Every stitch had been sewn by her mother, Abigail Brooks, during the final winter of her life. Even while illness weakened her body, Abigail had insisted on finishing every thread herself, smiling through the pain because she believed her daughter deserved something beautiful on her wedding day. She never lived to see Eleanor wear it. Only 8 weeks after Abigail's funeral, another tragedy shattered the family. Eleanor's fiancé, Thomas Reed, drowned while trying to guide cattle across a swollen mountain river after an unexpected spring storm. The wedding scheduled for early June never happened. Instead of standing before the chapel as a bride, Eleanor spent that summer dressed in black, watching neighbors lower 2 different dreams into the ground. 3 years had passed. Every spring, when the wildflowers returned to the valley, she quietly climbed into the attic, opened an old cedar chest, and carefully unfolded the forgotten wedding dress. She wore it for 1 hour, always alone, before putting it away again until the following year. No one in town knew, not even her closest friends. Only her father had discovered the ritual once, years ago. He had quietly closed the attic door without saying a word. He understood that some grief could not be rushed. That Tuesday morning, Eleanor believed she was completely alone. She was wrong. The sound of horses echoed across the dirt road leading toward the Brooks Ranch. A tall rider guided 2 saddle horses through the front gate before slowing to a stop near the old barn. Dust covered his boots, hat, and brown trail coat, proof of many miles traveled across rough country. Nathan Cole had arrived only the previous evening. Word had spread quickly through neighboring ranches that Samuel Brooks needed another ranch hand after 2 experienced cowboys had accepted higher-paying jobs farther north. Nathan had been searching for honest work since leaving Montana weeks earlier. Samuel had asked only 3 questions. Can you ride? Can you rope? Can you work before sunrise without complaining? Nathan had answered yes to all 3. That had been enough. Now, while returning from checking the eastern pasture, he noticed a woman standing alone beside the chapel in a beautiful lavender dress, unlike anything he'd expected to see on an ordinary workday. He respectfully removed his hat. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he called. Eleanor turned quickly, surprised that someone had found her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nathan wasn't staring at her with curiosity or pity. His expression carried only simple admiration. "That's a remarkable dress," he finally said. "Looks like someone made it with a great deal of love." The words struck Eleanor harder than she expected. No one had seen the dress in 3 years. Her throat tightened. "My mother did," she answered softly. Nathan sensed something in her voice and immediately regretted speaking. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to bring back difficult memories." "You didn't." She looked down at the delicate embroidery running across the skirt. "It was supposed to be my wedding dress." Silence settled between them as the breeze carried the sound of birds singing from the cottonwood trees nearby. "My mother finished sewing it shortly before she passed away." She paused, "And the man I was going to marry died before the wedding ever came." Nathan lowered his eyes, unsure whether words could possibly help. Most people rushed to offer comfort. He had learned long ago that comfort spoken too quickly often sounded empty. Instead, he simply nodded. "I understand more than you probably think." Eleanor looked at him with quiet surprise. Nathan rested one hand on the saddle horn before speaking again. My older brother died several years ago. After that, I spent most of my life riding from one ranch to another. You never stayed anywhere? No. Why? He gave a faint smile that carried more sadness than happiness. Because staying meant remembering. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt someone answer grief with honesty instead of sympathy. Neither of them realized it then, but beneath the bright Wyoming sky, among the spring flowers and the old chapel, two lonely hearts had just met, not through promises, but through shared silence. Their lives, once moving in completely different directions, had quietly begun following the same trail. The days that followed settled into the steady rhythm of ranch life. Before sunrise, the Brooks Ranch came alive with the sounds of horses nickering in their stalls, cattle calling across the open pasture, and the clang of iron buckets against the well. Every hand had a job before the first light touched the valley, and Nathan Cole quickly proved himself to be the hardest worker among them. He never waited to be told what needed doing. If a fence had broken during the night, Nathan repaired it before breakfast. If a horse threw a shoe, he was already leading it toward the blacksmith. When storms scattered cattle across the hills, he stayed out long after the others returned, making sure every animal found its way home. Samuel Brooks noticed. The old rancher had spent enough years around cowboys to know the difference between men who worked because they were paid and men who worked because it was simply who they were. Nathan belonged to the second kind. One evening, after finishing repairs on a collapsed corral gate, Samuel leaned against the fence and watched the younger man coil a rope with practiced hands. "You've done this a long time." Nathan smiled faintly. "Long enough to know there will always be another fence waiting tomorrow." Samuel chuckled. "That's about the truest thing I've heard all week." Slowly, respect grew between them. Meanwhile, Eleanor found herself noticing Nathan more often than she intended. Not because he demanded attention. Quite the opposite. He never tried to impress anyone. He never bragged about difficult rides or dangerous work. He didn't interrupt conversations or tell exaggerated stories around the supper table like many drifters did. Most evenings, he simply listened while others laughed, speaking only when he had something worth saying. There was a quiet confidence about him that made the ranch feel strangely calmer. One afternoon, Samuel asked Eleanor to ride with Nathan into the western meadow to inspect damaged fencing after several calves wandered through the broken rails. The ride was peaceful. The mountains stood tall beneath a bright sky, while a cool breeze rolled across endless grasslands. For nearly an hour they worked without speaking much. Nathan hammered fresh cedar posts into the ground while Eleanor stretched new wire between them. Silence never felt uncomfortable. Eventually, Eleanor looked toward the distant mountains. "You really have traveled that much?" Nathan nodded without looking up. "Montana, Idaho, Dakota Territory, Colorado, and nowhere ever felt like home?" He paused before answering. "I stopped looking for one." She studied him carefully. "People don't usually stop looking unless something happened." Nathan rested the hammer against the fence post. "My brother Jacob and I were raised on a small ranch. He was older than me." His voice remained calm, though quieter now. "A frightened horse broke loose while we were repairing fencing one afternoon. Everything happened too fast." He stared across the valley for several long seconds. "I blamed the land." Eleanor listened without interrupting. "So I left." "You never went back." "I told myself I was chasing better opportunities." He gave a tired smile. "But the truth is, I was running away from memories." The words lingered between them. Eleanor understood that feeling better than anyone. "I've spent 3 years doing the opposite," she admitted. Nathan looked toward her. "I stayed." She smiled sadly. "I thought if I never changed anything, somehow the memories wouldn't disappear." Nathan slowly nodded. "I don't think either of us found peace doing it our own way." For the first time in years, Eleanor laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. Just a small, genuine laugh that surprised even her. Nathan smiled too. The sound seemed to brighten the quiet valley around them. Over the next several weeks, their friendship grew naturally. Some mornings they rode together to check distant grazing fields. Other afternoons they repaired barns, branded calves, or gathered firewood before sunset. Neither one rushed the friendship. There were no grand declarations, only hundreds of small moments. Nathan remembered how Eleanor liked her coffee before dawn. Eleanor quietly left an extra biscuit on the table whenever Nathan returned late from checking livestock. Sometimes they sat on the porch after supper, watching the mountains disappear beneath orange evening light, speaking very little. Neither felt the need to fill every silence. One evening, as they watched swallows glide across the fading sky, Eleanor spoke almost to herself. "You know, everyone in town treated me like I might break." Nathan waited. They always chose their words carefully. She picked up a small pebble from the porch floor. "I know they meant well, but after a while it felt like nobody saw me anymore." Nathan answered softly, "They only saw your loss." She looked at him. "Exactly." Nathan folded his hands together. "I've learned something from all the places I've traveled." "What's that?" "People don't heal because someone tells them to." He glanced toward the distant hills. "They heal because someone finally sits beside them long enough that they don't have to carry the weight alone." Eleanor lowered her eyes. No one had ever explained her heart so simply. From the doorway, Samuel quietly watched the two of them talking beneath the fading sunset. He saw the smile on his daughter's face, a smile he had not seen since before Thomas died. Instead of relief, however, a familiar fear tightened inside his chest. He had already watched one good man disappear from Eleanor's life. He wasn't sure he could survive watching it happen again. Dark clouds gathered far beyond the mountains, hidden from everyone in Red Willow Valley. The morning had begun with bright sunshine and cool spring air, giving no hint that heavy rain was falling miles away in the high country. Experienced ranchers knew that mountain rivers often carried danger long before the storm itself arrived. A peaceful sky could hide a deadly flood racing through the valleys below. The Brooks family spent the morning moving cattle toward fresh, grazing land on the opposite side of Willow Creek. The crossing was shallow most of the year, little more than a gentle stream winding through smooth stones and patches of tall grass. Nathan rode beside Luke Brooks, Eleanor's younger brother, as they guided the herd toward the water. "You take the rear," Luke called with a grin. "These old cows trust you more than they trust me." Nathan laughed. "I think they're just smarter than we are." The cattle slowly entered the creek, splashing calmly through the cool water. Everything seemed ordinary. Then one of the ranch hands standing on the riverbank shouted, "The water!" Nathan turned. A distant roar echoed through the valley. Within seconds, the peaceful creek transformed into a rushing wall of muddy water, carrying broken branches, rocks, and fallen logs. The current slammed into the crossing with terrifying force. "Hurry!" Samuel shouted from a bank. The frightened cattle scattered in every direction. Several managed to scramble onto dry ground. Others were swept downstream. Luke urged his horse forward, trying to escape before the flood reached him. He was too late. The frightened animal lost its footing on the slippery rocks. Horse and rider disappeared beneath the violent current. "Eleanor!" someone screamed. She spun around just in time to see her brother vanish beneath the muddy water. For one frozen moment, she couldn't breathe. 3 years earlier, she had watched another river steal the man she loved. Now history seemed determined to repeat itself. "Luke!" she cried, running toward the bank. Samuel started after his son, but the current was already too powerful for anyone on foot. Nathan didn't hesitate. He kicked his horse into a full gallop along the edge of the river, searching desperately for a place where the bank curved close enough to intercept Luke before the current carried him deeper into the canyon. Every second mattered. Luke surfaced briefly, gasping for air before another wave dragged him under again. Nathan pulled his rope free with one swift motion. "Hold on," he shouted, though he wasn't sure Luke could hear him above the roaring water. He urged his horse farther ahead until he found a narrow bend where the current slowed just enough to give him a chance. The first throw missed by inches. The rope landed beside Luke before disappearing beneath the flood. Nathan pulled it back immediately. He took one deep breath. Everything became strangely quiet. The second throw sailed perfectly across the rushing water. The loop tightened around Luke's shoulders. "I've got you," Nathan yelled. Luke grabbed the rope with every ounce of strength he had left. Nathan wrapped the line around his saddle horn. His horse leaned backward with all its weight, while muddy water fought to drag Luke away. The strain nearly pulled horse and rider into the river. Hooves slipped against the soaked ground. For one terrifying heartbeat, it seemed all three would be swept away together. "Easy, girl," Nathan whispered to his horse. The animal dug deeper into the earth. Slowly, painfully, foot by foot, Luke moved closer to shore. Samuel reached the water first, grabbing his son's arm, while another ranch hand seized the rope behind Nathan. Together, they pulled Luke onto solid ground. He collapsed on the grass, coughing river water and struggling to breathe. Relief swept across the valley. But Eleanor's eyes weren't on her brother. They were searching the river. Nathan had remained dangerously close to the collapsing bank. As the soaked earth gave way beneath his horse, both of them slid toward the rushing water. "Nathan!" Eleanor screamed. Without thinking, she ran across the muddy ground. Nathan managed to free one boot from the stirrup just as the horse regained its balance. The animal lunged forward, climbing away from the edge only moments before another section of riverbank crashed into the flood below. Silence followed. Nathan climbed down slowly, breathing hard. His clothes were soaked with mud. His hands trembled from exhaustion. Before he could say a single word, Eleanor threw her arms around him. She didn't care who was watching. For several long moments, she simply held him, tears streaming down her face. "I thought," she whispered, unable to finish. Nathan gently rested a hand against her shoulder. "I'm here." She looked into his eyes. "I thought I was losing you the same way I lost Thomas." Nathan understood then that her fear had never truly been about the river. It had been about opening her heart again. Samuel walked toward them, with Luke leaning weakly against his shoulder. The older rancher stopped in front of Nathan, emotion filling his weathered face. "I judged you because I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "You saved my son's life today." Nathan shook his head. "I only did what anyone should have done." Samuel slowly reached out his hand. "No," he said. "You did what a good man chooses to do, even when it costs him everything." As the evening sun broke through the clouds, its golden light spread across the valley. And for the first time in years, the Brooks family realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing love even when fear refused to leave. The days following the flood felt different, though no one spoke openly about why. Life at the Brooks Ranch returned to its familiar rhythm. Horses still needed feeding before dawn, fences still demanded repair, and cattle still wandered farther than they should. But something invisible had changed. The heavy silence that had lived in Eleanor's heart for years no longer seemed quite so impossible to carry. Every evening she found herself walking toward the old chapel, not because she wanted to remember the past, but because she wanted to understand the future. Nathan often joined her. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they simply watched the sun disappear behind the Wyoming mountains while the valley turned shades of gold and crimson. Neither of them felt the need to force conversations anymore. One quiet evening, Eleanor finally broke the silence. "I spent 3 years believing loving someone again would somehow betray Thomas." Nathan looked across the wildflower fields before answering. "I don't think love works that way." She waited. "It isn't a place with room for only one memory." His voice was gentle. "You don't erase the people you've lost. You simply make room for new people beside them." Eleanor lowered her eyes. For the first time, those words felt true. A few days later, she climbed into the attic of the old farmhouse. Sunlight streamed through the dusty window as she knelt before the familiar cedar chest. For years, she had opened it with trembling hands. This time was different. She carefully lifted the lavender wedding dress into the light. The fabric still carried the faint scent of cedarwood, just as it had every spring since her mother folded it away. Running her fingers across the delicate embroidery, Eleanor smiled through quiet tears. "My turn now," she whispered. Instead of returning the dress to the chest after an hour, she carried it downstairs. She spent the next several evenings making one small change. Near the bottom hem, beside her mother's original stitching, Eleanor carefully embroidered a tiny line of wildflowers with her own hands, not to replace what Abigail Brooks had created, only to continue it. When she finished, mother and daughter had stitched the same dress together, years apart. One bright afternoon, Eleanor found Nathan repairing a fence along the eastern pasture. The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh grass, while horses grazed peacefully nearby. Nathan looked up as she approached. "You've been searching for me." "I have." She held the dress carefully over one arm. Nathan immediately recognized it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Eleanor smiled. "For 3 years, I wore this dress to remember everything I had lost." She looked down at the embroidery. "I don't want it to be a memory anymore." Nathan quietly set his tools aside. "What do you want it to be?" She took one slow step closer. "My mother made this dress because she believed one day I'd begin a family of my own." She looked directly into his eyes. "Thomas will always be part of my story. So will my mother." She paused, her voice filled with calm certainty instead of sorrow. "But neither of them would want my life to stop where theirs ended." Nathan's heart pounded. Eleanor smiled softly. "I want to wear this dress for the wedding it was always meant for." His eyes widened. "Are you asking me what I think you're asking?" She laughed, a warm, joyful laugh that seemed brighter than the valley itself. "I'm asking if you'll be waiting for me at the end of the aisle." Nathan stepped forward. "There isn't anywhere else I'd rather stand." Their wedding took place the following spring. The valley looked almost exactly as it had the morning they first met. Wildflowers covered the hillsides. The old chapel stood quietly beneath the endless Wyoming sky. Friends and neighboring ranch families filled every wooden pew. Samuel Brooks stood beside his daughter, proudly offering his arm. For the first time in many years, there was no fear in his eyes, only gratitude. As they reached the chapel doors, Samuel smiled. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I hope so." "You don't have to hope. I know she is." When the chapel doors opened, Nathan waited at the altar wearing the same quiet smile Eleanor had first seen on that spring morning beside the old church. She walked toward him wearing the lavender dress. Along the hem, the new embroidery caught the sunlight beside the stitches Abigail had sewn years before. The past and the present had become part of the same story. After the ceremony, the entire valley celebrated beneath clear blue skies. Children laughed through the fields. Music echoed across the ranch. Neighbors danced until lanterns glowed beneath the stars. Later that evening, Nathan led Eleanor outside the chapel. The wildflowers stretched across the hills just as they always had. "They're beautiful," he said. Eleanor smiled. "They used to remind me only of what I'd lost." She slipped her hand into his. "And now?" She looked across the endless valley before answering. "Now they remind me that every spring gives us another chance to begin again." Nathan wrapped an arm around her shoulders as the last light faded beyond the mountains. The wind gently moved through the flowers, just as it had years before. Nothing about the valley had changed, yet everything had, because healing had never meant forgetting the people Eleanor loved. It meant carrying their memories forward while finding the courage to welcome happiness again. And every spring after that, when the wildflowers returned to Red Willow Valley, they no longer marked the end of one story. They celebrated the beautiful beginning of another.